Over the past 30 years, an intensive open-net fish farm industry has been established on the West Coast throughout Indigenous territories occupied by British Columbia and Washington State. The Sockeye salmon return of the Fraser River watershed, the largest salmon run in Canada, was decimated by a construction-related rockslide in 1914 and was slow to recover. Since the 1990s, the numbers of returning salmon have declined once again. 2016 was the record low for sockeye returns, and in 2017, the sockeye fisheries for the Fraser and Skeena rivers were closed early due to low returns. Indigenous nations and scientists have shown that this recent decline is directly related to the operation of fish farms along the primary migration route for Fraser River salmon. Open-net aquaculture operations harvest Atlantic salmon in extremely high concentrations, requiring the use of massive amounts of antibiotics, hormones, and pesticides in maintaining their stock. Farmed fish are often diseased, deformed, unhealthy, and transfer pathogens to wild salmon populations. Alaska and California have banned open-net salmon aquaculture, and local communities have fought successfully to keep open-net fish farms out of Oregon and northern British Columbia. The established salmon farms located near Vancouver Island negatively impact some of the most salmon-rich waters in the world. Open-net fish farms release diseases, parasites, and contaminants into the surrounding waters, which wild salmon must traverse. These operations often create large dead zones on the seafloor below them due to the substantial amounts of sewage produced. Sea lice are a primary problem generated by fish farms. The dense concentrations of fish create the perfect conditions for sea lice to breed, produce eggs, and spread to wild salmon. In 2017, 18 marine biologists signed an open letter to the federal and BC governments stating that their research has unequivocally proven that sea lice from fish farms kill juvenile wild salmon. They state that in some cases, sea lice from fish farms kill up to 95% of migrating smolts. Attempts to mitigate sea lice often require heavy use of chemicals, evident by a recent application by Cermak to dump 2.3 million liters of pesticides into one of their farms in the Clayoquot Sound. Additionally, Piscine reovirus, a heart virus originating in Norwegian waters, has now been proven to exist in West Coast salmon farms. There is growing evidence that this virus is linked to the deadly heart and skeletal muscle inflammation disease, which is evident in recent footage of emaciated farmed salmon in BC. PRV and live parasites were recently found in blood water released from a salmon farm processing plant near Campbell River. This facility injects biohazardous waste into the primary migration route for Fraser River salmon. Floating open-net aquaculture operations are placed in narrow waterways so that they're protected from storms. These are often small corridors in critical salmon migration routes. The Discovery Islands between the Coast Mountains and Vancouver Island are peppered with salmon farms. There are numerous aquaculture operations along major salmon migration routes, such as the Johnstone Strait, which is a primary migration route for Fraser River salmon. Cumulatively, the existing fish farms on the West Coast have impacted the populations of many salmon-bearing watersheds. The Cohen Commission, a federal report that proposes solutions to restore wild salmon populations, recommends that open-net fish farms in the Discovery Islands should be removed if they impact the health of wild salmon or interfere with their migration routes. So far, the government has failed to fully implement these recommendations. In August 2017, one of Cook Aquaculture's fish farms near Cypress Island collapsed, releasing over 160,000 invasive Atlantic salmon into the Salish Sea. This event has been widely condemned by local Indigenous nations and has caused the Lummi Nation to declare a state of emergency. Following this collapse, the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians, an organization representing 57 Indigenous governments in the western states, signed a resolution calling for the ban of all non-native fish farm operations. In the past few decades, there have been numerous escape events from fish farms, cumulative failures that have spread millions of Atlantic salmon into regional water systems. Proponents of the salmon farming industry have denied that escaped fish reproduce naturally, and have denied that their operations spread sea lice and transmit diseases into local salmon populations. However, Indigenous communities and scientists have continually found evidence to disprove these claims, further condemning this industry as harmful to wild salmon. Salmon are the lifeblood for Indigenous nations and settler communities in West Coast watersheds, and they are keystone species for massive coastal and inland ecosystems. West Coast salmon are suffering from overfishing, habitat degradation, impacts from climate change, as well as impacts from open net aquaculture. Many Indigenous communities are reporting unprecedentedly low numbers of wild salmon in their waters. Additionally, the salmon-dependent southern resident killer whales of the Salish Sea are starving from the lack of their primary food source. As an apex predator species, their near extinction is an extremely stark indicator of the critical state of local salmon populations. In response to the direct harm that fish farms cause to wild salmon, members of 8 Aquaculture nations have occupied 3 fish farms in the Broughton Archipelago. The Norwegian corporation Marine Harvest has continued to restock these facilities with the assistance of the RCMP, and are attempting to deter Indigenous occupiers with court injunctions. On November 14th, a court ruling in favor of Marine Harvest has prohibited 2 Aquaculture women from returning to the Midsummer Island fish farm. However, these fish farms are still being occupied and monitored by Indigenous salmon protectors and their allies. 40 hereditary and elected chiefs from Aquaculture nations met with NDP ministers and Premier John Horgan, united in demanding that open net fish farms be removed from their territories. They also suggested that closed containment systems can replace open net aquaculture. In adopting the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, settler governments commit to honoring Indigenous self-determination of their lands and waters. Many licenses for Marine Harvest fish farms expire in June 2018. The NDP have the opportunity to reject the renewal of these licenses to honor their responsibilities for reconciliation. Failure to respect the authority of the Aquaculture nations is a direct continuation of colonization, exemplified most directly by the fact that this industry is actively destroying their primary food source. The Aquaculture nations are calling for support to raise funds, pressure the federal and BC governments, spread awareness, and to join them at the occupation sites. Funding is required for supplies, legal costs, and to build structures for Indigenous youth and elders. Numerous solidarity rallies have been carried out, as well as ongoing occupations of NDP and Department of Fisheries and Oceans offices. Indigenous leaders from neighboring nations have gathered to link arms with the Aquaculture water protectors. The continued development of open net fish farming threatens the future of the $1.5 billion wild salmon economy, as well as the livelihoods of Indigenous nations, settler communities, and the health of coastal and terrestrial ecosystems. The decline of wild salmon populations needs to be treated with the urgency it deserves, and should be prioritized above the short-term pilfering of resources for corporate profit. Aquaculture operations without Indigenous consent must be terminated and removed.